and thank you everybody for joining us today for this. This is my first pop-up webinar, so I know it's short timing here, but we appreciate we have a pretty good audience and from all across the state. And thanks for joining me. I'm here in tropical Buffalo today. I think most of our state is feeling pretty tropical these days. So I hope you're all having a good summer, as or what's left of it anyway. So if you've been following closely through the budget process, you may have noticed this, that what has statutorily been referred to as unrestricted aid, and what we commonly refer to as Bundy aid, now has restrictions. It's still called unrestricted aid in typical New York fashion, but there is specifically a new restriction that says if you do not submit a data and plan for increasing and improving faculty diversity, then you will not be eligible for 2022-2023 Bundy aid disbursement. Specifically by September 20th, 2022, and you really have to hand it to SED for the optimal timing here, because I know colleges and universities don't have much going on between now and September 20th. By September 20th, we all now have to submit really three things: data on current faculty, and a plan for improvement, along with goals by which we will assess whether or not we've met the goals. So data, goals, and then the data that we're going to use, sort of a second set of data, metrics, if you will, that'll tell us whether or not we've met our goals. And then in 2024 and 2026, at dates to be announced, we will be actually assessed as to whether or not those goals have been met. What that assessment will look like, whether we'll have to submit a data or additional data or a report, is all yet to be determined. So we don't really know. All we know is that something will happen in 2024 and 2026, where there will be an assessment of whether or not you've met the goals that you will be setting between now and September 20th. So the point here, I think it's important to focus on the definition of diversity that has been given to us by SED, because the whole point of this exercise is to increase faculty diversity. So what do they mean by diversity? It's a very broad definition that we're given. And I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. And I think it's important to remember that because there is some incongruity here with the definition of diversity that's given to us by SED, and then the data that they are asking for. So here is the very broad, expansive definition of what diversity means for purposes of these goals, of this plan. It includes things like socioeconomic, veteran status, age, gender identity, learning styles, not just gender, race, and ethnicity. However, when we submit our data between now and September 20th, they are essentially only asking for gender, race, and ethnicity data. Now, again, we're going to talk a little bit more. I think that broad definition of diversity still matters and is still operable, still important for us. But in the actual data that we're going to be submitting between now and September, they are going to be focusing on gender, race, and ethnicity of both full and part-time faculty. Who are the faculty for these purposes? It's essentially who you typically think of as faculty, with some slight broadening around the periphery, I would say. It's individuals who are basically hired to teach and do research. It also says public service. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think it means like running clinics. Maybe if you have a legal clinic or a medical clinic or something like that, and you have faculty who are teaching faculty, clinical faculty within that clinic, that's part of the public service aspect of it. But it's primarily teaching and instruction titles within the academic affairs section of the division of your institution. It may also include some administrators, again, on the primarily on the academic affairs side, vice provost, dean, chairs. I think those individuals are all going to fit within this broader, slightly broader definition of faculty. You are not, if someone is a member of the faculty, but they may be currently serving in an alternative role, like the director of a center or a program or something like that, you can still count them, but you can't count our really student assistants, graduate assistants, research assistants, people like that are clearly excluded from the definition. Other than that, it's pretty broad definition of and typical definition of how you would define faculty on your campus. So one of the first things, again, going back to the goals here, this is really the brass tacks of it. The data is kind of the easy part, I would say, because we generally have that information already. It's a matter of sort of inputting it and collecting it the way that they want it to be collected and submitting it the way that they want it to be submitted. The goals are something that we actually have to come up with now on our own. And there are going to be 3 measurable goals that every institution is going to have to submit. They may address things like gender, race, ethnicity, or they may address another category. That's why I'm going to refer back to that broad category, that broad definition of diversity. And then in addition to the goal, you need to submit a data that will be used to measure progress towards meeting that goal. We'll call it metrics. So you're going to have to come up with a goal and then metrics that are going to be used to assess whether or not you've met your goal sometime in the summer of 2024 and then again in the summer of 2026. So this is the real bread and butter of what we're going to be doing between now and September 20th, coming up with these 3 goals and the metrics by which we will assess ourselves and be assessed as to whether or not we've met those goals. This is just a look at the specific sort of form that SED has given us to give you an idea of what they're going to be looking for. Goal 1, 2, 3. Again, every college and university that's applying for Bundy aid is going to have to submit 3 goals, all related to faculty diversity. But again, they can relate to that sort of broad definition of diversity. I will just pause for a minute here and say you can specifically refer back to the data that you provide in the data table that they've given us related to race, ethnicity, and gender data. And if you are doing that, if your goal relates specifically to that data, then you can just refer back to it in the second section here. If not, if you are looking at a broader definition of diversity or going sort of outside of that data table, then you're going to have to come up with your own goal and your own data to inform that goal. So that's probably what a lot of the work here is going to be doing, is both coming up with a goal and then coming up with a way to assess whether or not we've met the goal, whether or not there's been progress towards that goal over a 2 and 4 year time period. So we've talked about goals, we've talked about data. What we haven't talked about is the plan, and there really is no requirement that you submit a plan, and you're not going to be submitting a plan. You're going to be, again, submitting the data, goals, and metrics. But in order to achieve those goals, I think it's self-evident that we're going to have plans. We're going to have plans to meet the goals over a 2 and 4 year trajectory. I think for the most part, those plans ought to be written. They ought to be specifically tied to each of those goals and the data that's going to be used to measure the goals. So that's really, again, that's a lot of the work that we're going to be doing here. It's one thing to set a goal. It's another thing to put in place, put in motion a plan to meet that goal, to actually move the data, to move the metrics, if you will. I think having a written plan is important because, it's almost track season up at Saratoga. You could hit a hot streak and retire early, and the person who comes in and fills your seat is going to have to figure out how the institution plans to meet these goals. and they're probably going to have to refer back to a written plan. Again, we're not going to publish or submit that plan necessarily. However, it is always possible that SCD could change its mind and say, we want to see how you've decided to make these goals, how you decided to achieve these goals. So we want a little bit more information on that. They could request that. Faculty and student groups, unions, student organizations could request that plan. And I think for the most part, we try to be transparent with those groups. And we want to be transparent to the extent that we can. It doesn't mean that we'll turn over everything immediately, but to have some evidence of a plan is probably a wise idea. Media requests could be another possible avenue by which these plans will become sort of public, even though they're not going to be submitted. And then there will be an internal stakeholder audience, again, that you want to make sure you have a solid written plan so that they can inform both them and what they're doing to help you achieve the goals and meet those goals. So how are we making a plan? We've got some ideas here. I wish I could just sort of send 3 goals and 3 plans out to all of our clients and say, here, just sort of rebrand these and input them into your table and submit them to SED, and then we're all done. The fact is, though, every institution is very different, and every institution is going to have its own goals and its own plans to meet those goals, and they're going to be very different depending on whether you're a large urban center campus or a rural upstate campus, small college somewhere. Your plans are going to look very different, as you can all imagine. And so you really need to, while we do have various strategies and approaches that we can sort of move around and try to fit within the context of your institution, and we will certainly help you with that. We can't just kind of give you a plan and say, go with it here, just publish this as your plan. One of the first things that I think is important to note about these plans is they don't have to be brand new. There is nothing here that requires that these 3 goals be things that you come up with between now and September 20th. They could be goals, initiatives, plans that you've had in place for a long time. Many of us are already focusing on faculty diversity and have been for a long time. I'd say most institutions are doing that in some form or another. And so repurposing an existing program, an existing plan, and using it for this purpose is absolutely acceptable. There's no reason why you can't do that. That is going to be the lowest of the low-hanging fruit. I think, as we're all trying to comply with this by September 20th, is take things that you're already doing and present them to SED in order to meet these requirements. What are your existing data and demographic trends? We want to, swim with the current here, right? Don't go against. Look at what your demographic trends are. Look at what your faculty demographic trends are specifically, and try to align your goals with those to the extent that you can, so that again we're swimming with the current. We're not trying to do something that we already know is going to be more difficult, but we're doing something that is in line with the direction that the institution is already headed. What strength and expertise can you use? Can you leverage? Question yourself, look around campus. Are there grants? Are there programs? Are there relationships with other institutions or cultural institutions, things like that you can leverage in order to help diversify your faculty, to help come up with plans, to help come up with goals, to help make sure that you can move those metrics in order to meet those goals. Appoint a responsible individual. Now, there's no requirement that you do this, but frankly, 2 years from now, I don't want any of our clients to be sitting around a conference table, having not met their goals and looking at each other and saying, "Oh, I thought you were supposed to meet that goal. Now that goal was in your sandbox." No, we want to make sure that there's somebody who's responsible for meeting every goal that we set for ourselves, and that person knows who they are. Everybody knows who they are. They have the resources that they need to accomplish this task that we've assigned to them. I'm going to hit on this one again in a minute, but I just would say make sure that the goals that you create are goals that you control. You don't want to rely on the alignment of the stars here to make sure that you meet the goals that you set yourselves. You have the opportunity to set these goals. Set goals that you control, goals that you know that you are able to achieve, or with reasonable certainty, have reasonable expectation that you'll be able to achieve. And then finally, be flexible here. Reconsider where you are a year from now, then again 2 years from now. If trends change, if new programs or new grants or things like that arise, make use of them. Go with the flow here, and adapt as you need to over the next few years. There's no reason to be particularly tied to any any plan, although you're going to be tied to the goals. But we're going to reform our plans as necessary and as appropriate as things change. As we all have seen in the last couple of years, things can change pretty drastically, pretty quickly. So what are some of the pitfalls that we're going to want to avoid here as we're coming up with our plans and our goals and our data? Setting specific targets or head counts for any characteristic or demographic categories. That is a recipe for a losing discrimination lawsuit or State Division of Human Rights or EEOC complaint. If you are saying we're going to hire 3 more people that fit into the Hawaiian and Pacific Islander category so that we can input that data in there. Every person you hire in your faculty who does not fit into that category is going to have a potential claim against you for the next couple of years, right? We don't want to do that. We do want to set meaningful metrics that move those categories and that do move those numbers, but we want to do it in a broad, flexible way that doesn't target specific individuals or groups or single out characteristics for hiring or retention or anything else. We want to sort of take a broad approach to that. Similarly, so kind of in the same vein, you want to avoid programs that are limited to specific groups. You can target groups and certainly try to have programs that are going to affect certain groups and are targeted to help bring in certain types of faculty members, but they can't be limited. They can't be exclusionary. Okay, so you can target a particular population without necessarily excluding another population or another group of individuals. So we want to make sure we're not being exclusionary, although we can be, certainly are going to be thoughtful and targeted in how we set up our programs and our goals and our plans. Again, as I just mentioned before, we want to make sure that you set goals that you do control, not setting goals that you don't control. You don't want to rely on luck or whims in order to achieve these goals and end up in a bad position 2 or 4 years from now. You want to make sure that you are setting goals that the institution controls its ability to meet. You want to be very careful, work with your counsel as you're talking about. These are sensitive issues. They're legally fraught issues. And there are going to be some difficult conversations going on around these goals, around this data, around these plans. And we want to make sure that those are occurring in a way that is going to be privileged to the extent that's appropriate. Work with your legal counsel. I would say the counsel should be involved in this process pretty thoroughly because it is, again, a pretty highly legalized process with a lot of risks that you're going to want to be careful about. Making sure you're not having conversations, particularly think of things like email, where you're producing discoverable. You want to be free and have candid, open conversations, but not be doing it in such a way that you're producing information that can be used against you someday. Think about that particularly with anything you submit to SED. because I would certainly assume that anything that goes to SED is going to become public in some manner or another. They may not publish it. They may publish it. I don't know. Under 129B, they publish their nice and naughty list. They may do something similar here. They may publish all your goals and plans. Somebody may foil all of them, and then they'll probably end up being released if they are. So I would just assume right off the bat, anything that you send to SED is going to be published, become public. And then internally, as you're having these conversations, you're likely to be collecting data as part of this effort. And so be careful in how you use and share that data. It's going to be sensitive data in many cases, and you don't want to overshare it. It's going to be shared on a need-to-know basis as you're collecting this particular, fairly sensitive data about sometimes specific individuals or groups of individuals. And then finally here, what is the sort of hook? The hook is the aid. And although the legislation does not give SED the power to approve or disapprove plans, and they say they're not going to, and they really don't have legal authority to do that, it does say they're going to follow up with institutions for clarification. And then they're going to process your plans, not approve your plans, but process your plans. What does that mean? We don't really know. My gut tells me, and I was a state bureaucrat for many years, so I'm allowed to be a little critical at times, is that you have regulators who were not given a lot of regulatory authority, and they're gonna take what they can get, and they're gonna try to regulate to the extent that they can these goals and plans and make sure that they look like what they want them to look like, and do fit the sort of the letter of their guidance to the extent that they can control that. So they're going to follow up with you, and they're going to process them, but they're not going to approve or disapprove. So we'll see how narrow those distinctions actually are once we get into it. So that's all I have for prepared materials. I do see there's some questions and answers here. And of course, we're always available to consult. This is meant to be a pretty brief little webinar into this just to get us started. But I will take a look at the questions and answers here. Some of them looks like have already been asked. Will they be made publicly available? I think you should assume that they will. They cannot ask questions about gender expression in a job interview. How will we make concrete goals in regards to this metric? That's a great question. One of the things I think you could do, sorry, my automatic light here. One of the things I think you could do in that regard is to make sure that you have a good policy on use of name, use of legal versus chosen or lived name, and look how many individuals make use of that policy. And that may be one way that you can sort of track, it may not track gender identity or expression specifically, but it at least shows that the institution is making an effort to be open, to be accommodating to individuals, and maybe one way that you can address that. For definition of fact, you can rely on the iPad's definition. Yes, I think you can, as long as it fits within those categories that I talked about. There's a fairly long definition given for faculty in the guidance that was put out by SED. I tried to kind of simplify it a little bit, but it's basically going to be your standard definition of faculty for most purposes, with some slight expansion around the periphery. Is this going to be a snapshot of faculty at a certain date? It's of however you would count it for the year. I think that's generally for most institutions going to be at the beginning of the academic year is when we're going to count. I don't see any reason why we would start counting on October 20th. It seems to me that we would start counting generally at the beginning of the fall term. That's how most the beginning of the academic year for most institutions, and where we sort of figure out where we are. So when you're submitting this year's data, you're actually going to be looking back to the last academic year. So you're going to be looking back, I suppose, back to August or September of 2021 and using the counts that you had at that time. Now, if you take the counts that you had in May instead, SED hasn't given us any particular guidance on that. They haven't said that's wrong or right. So I think you could probably get away with doing it either way, whichever one was more convenient, probably for the institution, whichever one you have the data more readily accessible. Since they haven't told us specifically, then I think you can use that flexibility in order to make the collection of data as easy as possible. This is a great question. Are we already significantly diverse? Is it a goal? One goal could be to maintain diversity on campus. I think so. I don't see any reason why not, although it's a diversity improvement plan. The way I would frame that is to talk about retention and look at your past retention trends and try to make some improvement on those. So yeah, I think being able to improve retention of diverse faculty is absolutely an acceptable goal. And that is essentially what you're asking, to maintain diversity. Is also, retaining those diverse faculty members that you already have. In the faculty definition, what about adjuncts? I do think adjuncts would generally count. There's actually a separate category for part-time faculty, and some of the titles that they include as samples include lecturer and things like that. So yes, I do think adjunct professors would be included in that. How can we talk about measurable goals without setting specific targets? It's an art, not a science, is the best I can say. To improve, you may look at sort of overall statistics. You may look at participation rates. You may look at improving those numbers broadly without specifically referring to any demographic or characteristic group. So you could say we're going to diversify would mean that all the groups are going to sort of become larger or more proportional, without saying we're going to target a particular group and increase our numbers there, right? So which would, it may not be a zero-sum game, but you certainly don't want to make it look like it is, like you're again selecting one group to the exclusion of another. And I see we just have a couple minutes here. Is it possible that SED will review plans, critique the goals, say they're not aggressive enough? Yes, it is possible. The legislation does not specifically give them the authority to do that. But could they release a statement saying that they think your goals are insufficient? Could they, color code campuses, institutions on their responses and say we're going to green, yellow, or red, depending on how consistent your goals are with what we think of when we think of faculty diversity as the state education department? Yeah, that's possible. Any things are possible, and they will, it seems to me, use the tools that they have available. Public shaming is one of the tools that they probably are going to look to as something that's available to them in order to make sure that everybody stays in line. All right. A lot of these talk about numerical targets and measurable goals without calling out specific individual groups or setting targets. All I can say is there are broad ways to increase diversity. You can increase training numbers. You can increase across the board allocations or the way that your data is distributed without saying we're going to focus on this particular population and increase by X number of faculty or by X percentage points this area. You can say we're going to broaden across the spectrum, right? Which is sort of the definition of diversity anyway. So with that, I see time is up. I'm sorry if I didn't get, I think I got to most of the questions. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all of them, but I'm always available to discuss. So please reach out if you do have further questions, and we're always available to generally consult on this as well. So please reach out to me or whoever you usually work with if we can be of assistance. And thank you for attending.